What's up, YouTube? It is Kelly from Kelly's Unexplained, and I'm back. I've been gone for about a month. If you haven't noticed, some of you have. Shout out to my good friends Seven Souls Paranormal, Mark from work, Jenny Love Paranormal TV checked on me, Nick checked on me, so thank you so much. I am well, I am fine. December was a crazy month. 2020 was a crazy year, and I did like 12 videos in 12 days, got super overloaded, and just needed a quick break. Plus, school started back in January. I'm a full-time teacher, and so that was overwhelming. And then I started a new book project. I'm writing a book about a serial killer here in my town. So with all of those things, it was kind of hard to get a new video in, but I'm back. I'm here. Thank you for all of those who checked in on me. I also want to say a huge thank you to every one of you, all of my subscribers. I hit the 1,000 mark last month. And it is overwhelming, the love and support that I've received from you guys. It is humbling. I appreciate it. I'm here to give you more content that you want. Shoot me an email or a message about what you want to see. But I love every single one of you, and I appreciate you guys for getting me to that 1,000 mark. I love you so much. So let's get started.
Every single day, I'm gonna make something great. That's my way. Every single day, I'm gonna make something great. That's my way.
Are new to my channel, which some of you are, I cover all things paranormal, true crime, myths and legends, anything that's just out of the ordinary and unexplained. Warning, the following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Today, we are going to be talking about Rosemary Kennedy, one of the Kennedy siblings. And as you know, that there's always been kind of this theory or belief that the Kennedys have what they call a Kennedy curse. All of their kids seem to befall some kind of strange death, and she is no exception. Reason why you don't really know about the story is because it was kept under wraps. It was kind of hidden from the family for so long. But we're going to dive into Rosemary Kennedy. So the famous president, JFK, who was assassinated in Dallas, and Rosemary was one of his sisters. Their father, Joseph P. Kennedy, was an Irish-born millionaire. He was a famous politician, and their mother was Rose Kennedy, who Rosemary was named after. They dated for about 7 years before they got married, and it was due to the fact that their fathers of both Joseph and Rose were political rivals. They hated each other, and they forbid them to date, get married. They did it anyway. A true Romeo and Juliet love story. Rose and Joseph went on to have 9 children, and 3 of them went into politics. For the most part, they lived their lives out in the open, and they were kind of considered the royal family of America. Rosemary Kennedy was born in 1918 on September 13th. At the time of her birth, the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic was epic. It was in full force, and she was being born in the Boston hospital. Her doctor was not there. He was on the front line working the Spanish flu. So Rosemary's mom, Rose, was going into labor. She was giving birth to Rosemary, and the doctor was not around. He was trying to fight the pandemic, the Spanish flu, and the nurse that was in the room said, "We don't want this baby born without the doctor." Rosemary was already in the birth canal, and the nurse, to try to hold off the birth, held Rosemary in the birth canal for over 2 hours, waiting for the doctor to show up. I have had 2 children, and I can't imagine holding a baby in the birth canal for 2 hours. You would have to fight me. This family was one of the most prominent families in America. They were millionaires. How could you be born without a doctor? We couldn't. The travesty of this. So no, we're going to hold this baby in until he's ready. By golly. So as you know, this caused some major problems with the baby, Rosemary. For 2 hours being lodged in the birth canal, there was a lack of oxygen and nutrients, and she suffered some brain damage. Finally, the doctor showed up. Rosemary was born, and on the outside, things looked normal. She looked just like her siblings, dark hair, big blue eyes. Inside, not so much. She was traumatized. From an early age, the parents knew right away that there was something wrong with Rosemary. She didn't move as much as her siblings. She didn't talk as much as her siblings. She didn't progress as much. She didn't learn as fast, and so she really stood out among her siblings. As time went on and the siblings grew, the gap kind of got wider and wider between the siblings as far as what Rosemary was able to do and say and accomplish compared to her siblings. It just seemed like the further in age they got, the further behind she got. And so at this time, they didn't really know what to do, how to help her, what kind of resources that they were given, but they tried. So the mom, Rose, took her out of public school with her siblings and kept her at home 24/7, hired a private tutor to teach her at the house. She didn't want her daughter to be seen in public. It would look bad on the family name. And Rosemary wasn't allowed to go outside like her siblings. Her siblings would go outside and play, and she was locked in the house, and she would look out the window watching her siblings climb trees, play in the backyard, and it just sent this wedge between her and her siblings and her parents, and she knew she was different. Oh, it has been reported that whenever she would see her siblings go outside and play and she was once again stuck in the house, she would have these fits of rage, and they classified them as seizures. Now, I know that you and I have been in the house quite a bit during this pandemic. Imagine this times 100. Family thought that these were acts of mental illness, which was highly stigmatized in the 1920s. That was a no-no. It was something that was hidden and not talked about and just pushed under the rug. Not really effective treatments for any of these back then. So with a prominent family as the Kennedys, no one could know about this. The family thought to send her away. The best course of action, send her to a mental institution, get her out of the house, get her away from prying eyes. Maybe they can help. So they sent her to a private mental institution for some help. The mental institutions at this time were horrible. They were filthy. They were disgusting. They were houses of horror. They did not know what to do with mentally disturbed or disabled people. In fact, it was a house of torture, to be blunt. Patients were often chained to walls. They were next to hardcore criminals. They were given medicine to just make them sleep for 2 days straight. They were abused terribly, and medical experiments. So Rosemary was 11 at this time, and they took her out of the mental institution and put her in a boarding school. It was kind of like a Montessori type of school where you kind of did hands-on learning, a lot of manipulatives. You didn't sit in a desk and a chair in a classroom all in rows. So it was very forward thinking at that time, but it was to get her away from her siblings and from the public eye. Over 9 years, this continued, and she was brought to 5 different schools in 9 years to see if any one of them could help her. And she just did not fit in. None of them could help her. None of them were patient with her. None of them know what to do. And so at that point, they would move her to another one. Same thing would happen. Finally, at age 19, Rosemary got the big break that she needed. Father, Joseph Kennedy, received a job promotion as the U.S. ambassador for the United States, which meant that she was going to have to be pulled out of the boarding school to take her with the family as they moved for this new job adventure. Just 2 weeks after the arrival of the king to present the U.S. ambassador, Joseph Kennedy, Rosemary and her sisters were presented to the king. British newspapers thought Rosemary was exquisite. She was beautiful. She had this aura about her, and the British newspapers just wrote and wrote and wrote about her and plastered her all over the papers. Much to the family's surprise, they weren't expecting that. But they never let Rosemary out of her sight. She was always pictured with her sister and her mother, and just to kind of keep an eye on her, make sure she didn't do anything crazy, make their family look nuts. You got to keep that picturesque image going. Definitely could not let the king and queen know that their daughter had a disability. Heaven forbid. It was a bold move to present her to the king and queen because something could have gone wrong. She could have blurted out. She could have had one of her fits, as they say. But not presenting her to the king and queen would have caused a lot of controversy as well, because a lot of questions would have been asked. So they kind of like, okay, we've got to do this, but we've got to play it cool. We've got to keep her in line. We've got to just get through this and things will be okay. It started to get to Rosemary to have to attend all of these functions and balls. There were so many rules and regulations and people, society's norms that she wasn't used to. And they were always on her. Don't do this, Rosemary. Don't do this, Rosemary. Sit here, Rosemary. Say this, Rosemary. And she couldn't remember everything that she was supposed to do and was not supposed to do. So as you know, accidents happen. So now that she is out of the boarding school, her family returns to the United States because World War II broke out in 1939. They were in Britain attending all these balls with the Queen, and now Britain is in the war with Germany. So they fled England to get away from the war. They brought Rosemary with her. She was away from the Montessori school. She was away from her Catholic nuns at the boarding school. She was not receiving any treatment, and so she regressed. Though she looked like a normal, on the outside, all-American woman, on the inside she was very immature, childlike, didn't know the social norms at all. Her siblings began to start families, began to start their careers. You could see them taking off. They started going in their different directions, and Rosemary wasn't even allowed outside of the house alone. Her mother tried to find a Montessori school in America, but there were no schools that wanted to take a disabled 20-year-old as a student. They just didn't know what to do with her. She was just kind of at that middle stage where she was too old for school, but too young for institutionalization. So they were referred to a doctor. At this point, it is reported that she began sneaking out of the house because she was just tired of being locked up, and she was being sexually active with boys in town. Obviously, the boys were taking advantage of the fact that she was mentally disabled and probably couldn't make those decisions on her own. The family found out that she was sexually active, and her father, Joseph, went berserk. He said, there is no way that I can have this, being of a Christian family in politics. Can I have my daughter sneaking out, being sexually active before marriage? We've got to fix this now before she ruins everything. So he found a doctor that was willing to help her, Dr. Walter Freeman. Dr. Freeman and his little sidekick had been researching some neurological surgeries that could fix mentally disabled people, and the idea of lobotomy came about. I don't know much about lobotomy. I had to really research it for this video, but basically lobotomy is you take a portion of the brain and you remove it so that certain neurons are not firing against something else, and it's supposed to fix mental instability. At the time, he was claiming that his lobotomies could cure all kinds of different ailments, from alcoholism to nymphomaniac to sexual problems to mental disorders. 5,000 lobotomies were performed in America in the year 1940, and Dr. Freeman was responsible for 3,000 of those. And almost all of these lobotomies were on young women who were having sex before marriage. So Joseph dropped his daughter off at Dr. Freeman's office, and he drilled 2 holes into the 23-year-old's brain. She was awake the entire time that this lobotomy was being done on her brain. She was singing songs, reciting poems. Dr. Freeman was cutting the frontal lobe off of her brain, piece by piece, until she stopped singing and talking. Then he knew something was wrong. What is sad is Rosemary didn't even know that this was going to be done to her. She trusted her parents. She was strapped to this table. Her parents said, "Oh, trust us, you're going to be okay." They strapped her to this table and started cutting her brain. She had no idea that this was going to be done to her. So the family realized right away that something was wrong. She was alive, but she could not walk or talk anymore after this procedure. She was bound to a wheelchair and could not even speak anymore. She immediately went into physical therapy to try to regain some of her movements. She was able to get one of her arms working and one of her legs working. The other leg turned inward, kind of like a clubbed leg. And it took her 6 months to a year to be able to talk again. And when she did get the ability to speak, it was kind of like child gibberish when they learn to talk. It's random. It doesn't make sense. It's kind of chaotic. And that was her language at that point. This was definitely not something that they wanted to present to the public. So she spent 20 years in this institution. Parents told the other siblings, the other 8 siblings, because they started to ask, "Where's Rosemary? Where's she gone? How's she doing?" They said, "Oh, she's fine. She's working with kids." Never told them the truth. It wasn't until after 1961 when Joseph, the father, had a massive heart attack that the rest of the family found out where she actually was. And I don't know if he told them on his deathbed or, they came across medical documents, but it is known that after his stroke or his heart attack that they found the truth about Rosemary and were mad, upset, astonished, shocked, to say the least. Siblings began to see her and visit her in this facility after their father's death a few times here and there, but seeing her and realizing they're grown adults, realizing what had happened to her this whole time and them not knowing it, it did start some campaign and some championing into the politics of the mentally disabled. And so JFK, her brother, used this as a major platform in his campaign as president. JFK would use his presidency to sign the Maternal and Child Mental Health Awareness Act. This was the first legislation to cover the mental and learning disabilities in American people. It was a precursor to the American Disabilities Act, which their brother Ted Kennedy pushed in the Senate while he was a senator. Ted Kennedy, Rosemary's brother, also sat on the board of the American Association of People with Disabilities. Rosemary's sister, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, founded the Special Olympics in 1968. Eunice also broke her family's silence when she came public about Rosemary and what had been done to her and where she was in 1962. She basically just spilled the tea. Ugh, that makes me so mad. Okay, that is the story of Rosemary Kennedy and her lobotomy, and how 2 horrible doctors, actually a nurse and a doctor, changed the course of her life in an instant, just like that. And how we need qualified medical doctors. So if you're a great medical doctor, we love you. We appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel. I will be with you again this Friday. I promise I'll be here. Love you guys. Bye.